Support for this and all the free content of Addressing Gettysburg is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special Ask A Gettysburg guide. I think it's number 18, right? We're up to number 18 now, Eric? Is that right?
And they're not all special.
They're not all special, no. Just a few of them. But we got Jessie Weedleton here with us today. We're going to be talking about becoming a licensed battlefield guide here at Gettysburg National Military Park. And this was Jessie's idea. And I thought, what a great idea, because I know that there are people who listen who are either actively studying to become a guide or are considering studying to become a guide or whatever. Or maybe they just wondered about what it's like to become a guide. And so we thought that this might be a great thing. Now, of course, I'm not a guide. So Jessie's kind of going to be the, well, not kind of. You are going to be the expert here on this one, talking about all the things you got to go through and everything like that. As a reminder to all of our listeners, the best way that you can help the audience grow is by liking and sharing and pestering your friends to listen to the podcast, as well as leaving 5-star reviews on the Apple Podcast app and anywhere else that you can. So, Jessie, let's start with a background on the guide force itself. What is it? Is it everywhere? Is it at every national park? Is it just here? What's the deal? How did it come about? Why are there guides here? And really, sorry.
How many questions are you?
I'm going to pile it on. Really explain not only what the history of the guides is, but explain to everybody the difference between a guide and a ranger, because I often hear people use the terms interchangeably, but they mean very different things here at Gettysburg. So go ahead.
Well, yeah. Really, the guiding in itself, it's hard to pinpoint the day that it started on the battlefield. But one of my mentors, Fred Hawthorne, is kind of the expert on the history of guiding. Whenever he starts his talk, you can look up some of his talks on YouTube, and he usually gives a program when the guide exam comes around. But we always talk about the start of the reburial process right after the battle. Well, actually just burying the dead on the battlefield where they lay. They didn't have a place to put them right away. And some people started buying plots in Evergreen Cemetery. But families would hear about either their son or husband being wounded or killed, or maybe they just didn't hear back from them since the Battle of Gettysburg, and they're wondering where they are. So you start to have people traveling to Gettysburg looking for their loved ones, whether they're wounded or whether they know that they're buried somewhere. Because sometimes their buddies would write home and try to give them directions. But they don't know where these places are. They don't know where to start looking. So then these people who live in Gettysburg had to start learning where the units fought on the battlefield to try to help the families find these guys.
Do we know how they started, how they learned that? Like, how would they learn that?
Well, first you got to, figure it out the hard way. Just go out there and start looking. But just by talking to each other and people that would, come back, you just kind of build on your knowledge.
The wounded, talking to the wounded too.
Yeah, the wounded, and you also have John Batchelder, who's here right after the battle, talking to the wounded, interviewing them about where they fought on the battlefield. But once you start to build this working knowledge of where the regiments generally fought on the battlefield, you're going to use that pretty soon afterward when people start traveling to Gettysburg wondering what happened here. So these people start to transition into guides. You also have early guides who are veterans themselves, and some of the early guides weren't even veterans of this battle. So the local unit, the 87th Pennsylvania, that fights at Winchester, there's quite a few people in that regiment from Gettysburg.
Jack Skelly, one of them?
Yeah, and William Culp, and there's a man named William Holtzworth who comes back and becomes one of the early guides. You see him in a lot of the pictures of the horse-drawn carriages leading people around. But really what happened to kind of boost a need for a licensed service was the 50th anniversary and just this huge gathering of the veterans on the battlefield, and then the thousands of visitors that are coming. And people just start realizing how much money there is to be made from tourism. You have the Springs Hotel being built, and they are really shifting toward, making money off of the attraction to the battlefield. And the veterans are starting to worry that people are going to be telling stories for the effect and for the show, and not focused on telling the story correctly, or as correctly as possible as time goes on. So there are a lot of veterans in the government at the time, and it's pretty easy to pass into law a rule that you have to be licensed by the federal government if you're going to give tours on their park. But that only partially answers one of your 5 questions. but this is, so Gettysburg is unique in that it's the northern battlefield. It's, drawing a lot of the tourism. It's the battlefield that's selected for the reconciliation of 1913, for that reunion. But there are other battlefields like Vicksburg and Antietam that developed a guide process as well. I'm not sure what year those were started, but it's very similar to...
This is the first, though?
Yes.
Okay.
But
because there's one at Antietam now, right?
Yeah.
That's a more recent one.
And if we want to give tours at Antietam, we have to take their test. Same with Vicksburg.
Yeah, so you can't... I think, wasn't it at one time that you could go down there as a Gettysburg guide and give a tour at Antietam, and it wouldn't be a big deal? Well, I know people who did, so but it was before they had their guide program.
I guess Harper's Ferry, right? You have to.
Harper's Ferry is another one, yeah.
But
okay, so then the other question was the difference between a guide and a ranger.
Okay, now we are independent contractors, so we're licensed by the Park Service. We take our tests. Our test is developed by both battlefield guides and park rangers, but as we get into some of the other stuff we're going to talk about, I can't speak on behalf of the Park Service. I don't know when the next guide exam will be. They're the ones who figure all that out. But we have a park supervisory ranger that, is our conduit between the Park Service, the Gettysburg Foundation, and here to make sure that we're doing our jobs and doing...
For the benefit of the really new to it all, a ranger is a federal employee.
Yeah,
and you are a licensed independent contractor licensed by the federal government to make money on the park.
So the only thing that the Park Service oversees is our license. If we do something like show up drunk for tours or something, they can take our license away.
Right.
We don't have to retest ever again. But we're not employees of the Park Service. We're not employees of the Gettysburg Foundation, and we can hire ourselves out to all the private companies that operate on the battlefield.
Right, okay.
So as a guide, you have the freedom to make your own schedule. You have to pay for your own health insurance, okay, and those kinds of things. But in exchange, you can, work your way around really any sort of vacation that you want to, as long as you get your minimums. So we have different categories of our license. We can work part-time or full-time, and as they're issuing the guide exam, they can decide which types of licenses they'll be accepting.
So it could be, next time they give the test, we only need 25 part-time guides. And
right. So
that would be
last time.
Can you go you could become full-time eventually, right?
Yeah. So every year when you renew your license, you choose what level you're going to renew.
Okay. And I'm sure you have to pay to renew.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a fee every year.
We have to pay for a lot of stuff. So that's the one thing, if you're thinking about taking the guide exam, it really is for the benefit of the freedom to work your own schedule, to be able to talk about the battlefield, to be able to just take in new information and put that on your tours, to interact with the public, and you really have to get your enjoyment from that. You're not going to make a lot of money. And you can if you work hard at it and you do a lot of bus tours with 8th graders. Okay,
right? But who wants to do that?
I feel like that's not something a lot of people consider when they're thinking about sitting for the exam. You're not going to get a lot of people that are taking a tour for the first time that know a lot about the battle.
Right.
Or even about the Civil War.
Or
a lot of people take it because it's for their kids. They want their kids to be exposed to this, and a lot of the time I am giving tours directed toward the 11-year-old girl in the tour, So that's why a lot of people come to Gettysburg. They want to expose their kids to this. And it's very important. So, it's not ideal, to spend your your day with hordes of 8th graders, but those are the people that are figuring out what they're going to do with their lives. Like, that's the age where they're being exposed to things and thinking about, do I want to, work on a Civil War battlefield? There are kids that are obsessed with this stuff.
Or do I just want to learn about it? Maybe not work on it, but learn about it.
You got to think, you've got a bus and people are flirting with each other and, they're crawling around the rocks when you get off at your stops. But like 1 or 2 kids you're really paying attention. They're not going to nod to everything you have to say, but they're listening and you're making an impression on them. So that's how what we do is going to continue into the future. It's not teaching somebody who already knows pretty much everything about the Civil War a couple more things. It's getting people interested for the first time. And that's kind of how the test has changed over the years to really gear the test toward finding people who care about that, who care about making an impression on the visitor rather than barfing all of their knowledge onto them for 2 hours over and over again.
So I've spoken with history professors, medical doctors, lawyers, etc., who have all taken the test and either failed or they failed at one point or another. And they were surprised, especially the history professors. They were the most surprised out of these people. But, medical doctors, you got a lot to take a lot of tests in med school. Lawyers, it's all reading and, memorizing things and getting it right and everything. But they couldn't pass this test. Why is it so hard? Or is it?
There are a lot of facets to the subject material that are covered in the written exam. And if you miss one of those chapters, you're going to miss an entire page or 2 pages of the exam. You're going to leave most of the questions blank. And, you're going to ace the section on the battles leading up to Gettysburg. You're going to ace the section on where troops were arranged on July 3rd for Pickett's chart, But if you miss the history of guiding or the development of the battlefield as a park, you're going to just totally wipe out on a couple of the sections, not just on the fill-in-the-blank questions, but in the essay question portion of the test, which is half of it.
So it's not enough to just be really good on the battle itself, regiments and troop movements and casualties and all this stuff, because that's only a part of what they're going to test you on.
So getting through the test is about learning to, I hate to put it this way, but like learning to play the game, so to speak. By when you're about to take a test, for whatever in college, or you need to know how it's weighted, what your points are worth, so that you know how much to focus on certain areas, or you're going to spend way too much time on just one part of it and be kind of lost in the dark for the rest of it. So what I thought I'd do, because I know nobody knows when the next exam will be. This has been the longest period of time in recent history without an exam.
When was the last time they gave the exam?
2017.
Oh, wow.
When I passed.
Wow.
So
that is a while.
Well, that's when they started the written portion. So you can, there are some resources online where you can really look into the details of what the test is like and what it's like to be a guide. I would recommend going to our guide's website. It's called GettisburgTourGuides.org. And if you look under the section that says LBG exam 2017, and that has the packets that they were putting out when they were, trying to get interest in the exam for that year.
The most recent information about the exam is from the past
2017 test.
Do they? How soon before the actual giving of the exam do they put that information up? So will there be
Honestly,
a 2021
that's
page?
What's varied over time is like how much notice they give. Usually the guides have enough time to prep a summer lecture series before the test is offered in December. So we'll have a series of classes offered through the summer. And so maybe like late spring, early summer would be a time to expect an announcement. But we usually have a series of like 8 to 10 classes that focus on those different subjects that'll be on the test. And some of the test prep programs are given by guides who help to develop it. Mm-hmm. So I'm not on that committee. Maybe I will be. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But that's a really good starting point, because a lot of what you need to do to pass the written test is honestly a lot of cramming right before the exam. You know, you've read books on it, but, you know, you read a book and you're not remembering the details. So, like, if you're reading through books and you're coming up with, like, flashcards and things like that, I mean, all of that's helpful. But you're going to spend a good solid, 3 months just literally cramming and cramming before you actually take the written exam. But there are things that you can do now to put yourself in a better spot, not just for that first phase, but for the phases that follow.
Right, because how many phases are there in total? It's
4.
like 4?
So the first phase is a written exam of around 200, 250 questions. And they have changed the test over time, like we were talking about, to kind of focus more on the human aspect of the story and being able to interact with visitors about modern issues, current events as well, that relate to the Civil War. So in the past, when a lot of the guides who are currently guiding took the exam, like in the 90s or even before, 2015 was the first time they really changed the test up. But there were different sections where you'd have to do like fill in the blank, matching, recognition of officers and stuff like that.
Connect the dots.
Yeah. And they just realized when you're on a tour, you don't have multiple choice. Like you either know it or you don't. And
right.
There's really nothing else. And a lot of people are upset about that, but, you know, everybody's on the same page. You know, mm-hmm. If you find it difficult to memorize all this stuff, so does everybody else. And you get bonus points if you write someone's first name. Okay. So I guess usually I took the test twice, and usually I had like some name. I'm just like, if I don't know, I'm going to use Henry, you know, and then the next test, it was like George or something. But I missed 2 Samuels as first names.
Samuels, yeah. Spelling
doesn't matter very much unless it's like they can't tell what it is. I remember I spelled Robert Rhodes like Randy Rhodes.
Is that with an H?
Yeah. And I didn't get any points taken off for that.
Shows where your head is at. So you have the written. Go ahead.
And yeah.
And so there's an essay component to that.
I think it was 250 fill in the blank questions.
250.
And then, so I've taken the guide exam twice. I took it in 2015. I placed 5th on the written test. I made it through the interview. And then you have like a training session. And then you take the car tour, which is a 2-hour tour with a battlefield guide and our supervisory ranger. And they are evaluating you the whole time. So a lot of the time they're quiet, taking notes, and you're just wondering how you're doing. And if they ask a question, you're wondering why, you know, like, did you, it's usually because you leave yourself open, like, you know, so wait, where are we? You know, what's a brigade? And those kinds of questions. But if you fail the oral exam, that last car tour phase, if they don't feel like your tour was adequate, or if you did something like a traffic violation, you know, if you roll through a stop sign, it's pretty serious because they expect you to be able to drive people's vehicles and make them feel comfortable as a professional. So you got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. But I made it all the way to the oral exam. They give you 2 chances. So if you fail once, they give you a second try within a couple weeks. But if you fail that, you've got to start the whole thing over again. So
and the first
I failed the second driving tour, and I started the whole process.
So you failed the first driving tour and the second driving tour?
Yep.
And then the first step really is not the written. It's the waiting, right?
Well, and
because now you got to wait another,
the
2
test
years?
had been offered at a pretty much every 2-year basis. Mm-hmm. And people were like, that's a long time in between. Well, if you make it all the way to the end and fail, if it's any closer, you have to skip around. You know, there's no way to prepare yourself for the written again.
Right, because it's after you pass the written and you go through all these other stages, it's not like it happens in a 2-week period, right? It's months.
So you'll take the test in December, you'll have an interview in like February, and then training maybe a month or two after that, and then throughout the summer and the fall, they're testing people and hearing their car tours.
It's basically a year-long test.
Which seems crazy, but it's really not, because there's no prerequisite. You don't have to have a degree in history. You don't have to have anything qualifying you to take the test. You just have to know the information.
But why don't
so
they...
it's crazy, but that's the best part of it is that anybody can do this. You know,
No, it's like the last truly American thing out there. Well, except that you have to have a license to do it. But no, but
right.
I guess what I'm saying
like
is
the American dream, you know.
Yeah, anybody can make it. but I guess like what I'm saying is that if you go through all that time and money, it's not cheap, right? Because you have to pay for the test, which is what, $250 or something like that.
That's what it was last time. Who knows what it would
so it'll be $500 this time.
If it follows the trend, like you fill in, what's the next number in this sequence? $5, $25. $250. I guess it's fine.
Yeah, well, so I guess it just sounds so strange because you would think that usually when you go through that much for something, they call it, you know, school, and you come out with a degree. But here you could go through all those phases and go 2 minutes over on the tour, or go through a stop sign or something at a roll and then fail.
If you make it through the process, you'll start to hear horror stories from guides who have tested with past supervisors, and a lot of the test has changed. I've taken it twice in the new version. Part of the reason why they had to redo it is because people were just passing around test questions until the whole field was like saturated. And if you didn't have a guy who could get you an old test, you had an unfair, disadvantage in taking it. So they really had to freshen that part up. And they realized like certain things don't really apply to giving tours. So why would I have to memorize a list of what all these generals' faces look like when I don't have to do that on a tour? I don't have to recognize, what, I don't know, different colonels and so forth look like. But you do have to know what the monuments are, because you have people that come from California because their ancestor fought here and they're only here for 2 days, and you got to show it to them. And you can take like little books along that help you cheat and find things, because it's really hard to keep all of the Pennsylvania regiments straight in your head. But they definitely want to see how much you know for that, that written portion. But the tour itself, the tour part of the test has changed, because in the past it seems like some of the other rangers wanted to kind of kick you off the ledge and see if you can sink or swim, and then give you a second try and be a little nicer to you. Like the first time, saying,
just see how you do under pressure.
Right. Just like developing a crisis for no reason.
Right.
And seeing how you react to it. And then they realize, well, you're stressed enough just trying to do a straightforward tour.
Right.
Because it's very hard to take all the knowledge that you stuffed in your brain for the first phase and push it all out and put back in just enough information to tell a meaningful story to somebody. And you still have to know all that stuff, because, on the guide exam, you're tested on the causes of the war. You're tested on, like, the Kansas-Nebraska Act and all of those things. And it's like, yes, you're not going to talk about that on every tour, but sometimes you really need that information when someone's trying to push, against slavery as a cause for the war. These things will help you to academically answer those questions without getting your own political,
Right, you can make it look like you don't have a dog in the fight. You're just giving them facts.
Right, and so that's why we have the interview phase, because why would the park rangers and the battlefield guides waste their time on a car tour if they can tell from an interview that you're not going to be able to to like keep your politics
cool.
out of it, or be able to,
or just have. Do you have to just kind of have a personality, be able to talk to people?
Right.
Is that part of it? Yeah. That's what they're looking for when you...
Yeah, so in the interview, you're tested, and that's another thing. Like, even in those phases of the test, you're tested on a rubric. So
Stanley rubric?
if you're taking an essay, if you're filling out an essay question, you got to think about, well, man, handwriting is 5 points. I got to focus on that. So you don't want to just
is 5 points.
Well, I don't know.
Oh,
but you got to focus on all the things that make up your test score, because you just need those numbers to push on, through to the end of it.
Right. All right. Well, so do you want to get to some listener questions, or do you have more that you want to share with us first?
So I'd say my best advice right now for people that are thinking about the guide exam is that there are resources on that website. There, is guiding for me. Like, you want to read through that stuff and really think about, do I want to do this for a living, or am I just trying to see how much I know about the Battle of Gettysburg?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you take the test, just trying to see how much you know about the Battle of Gettysburg, you could be ruining someone's life who's really trying to make this, who's looking forward to retiring in Gettysburg. And, you don't know their life situation. Like, this might be their last shot. And if they don't make it through, they're not going to try again. And the test is somewhat graded on a curve. Like, they'll see how everything flushes out and make a cutoff. It's never the same. But, they're not going to take a bunch of guides if not many of them pass above, 75% or something. So they're going to make a cutoff. And if you're just taking the test to see how well you do, and you actually end up doing pretty well on the written exam, you're going to bump somebody out of it.
I know a guy who did that. He took it just to see. He finished first in the class, and he never went any step further.
So it's really not nice. I can't tell you not to do it. People are going to pay the fee. They're going to do it because they want to. I get that. But if you're thinking, like, I just want to see what the test looks like, I want to see what it feels like to try to get through this thing.
Right.
The way there's other things that you can do to both get that experience and not screw somebody else over.
Right.
Like, you could take the written test, you break for lunch, and then when you come back for the fill in the blank portion of the test, which is the hardest part, honestly, you come back and you're doing the essays. You can read through those essays, think about them, maybe go home and write about them, but you don't need to fill in that section of the test. You can just hand it in, you're not going to pass, but then you're ready for next time. Like,
right.
If you're not ready to move to Gettysburg, if you're not ready to commit to this, please do not.
See, that's the thing,
butt
right?
into that line, because people, now it's been 4 years since the last test. So if you were that dude who knew he didn't want to be a guide, or woman, and you bump somebody out, that person now has to wait 4 years or more. It could be more than that to take the next test.
Yeah, it's a jerk move.
And but some people aren't going to know if they want to do this until they're at that last phase, until they're taking the oral exam. They're like, you know what? I don't really think this is for me. And that's fair. You
sure.
can,
if you go that far,
by all means, try your hardest and feel it out. But if you already know that you're not serious about guiding, it's really just, it's not fair to the people that are grading the test. It is stressful having to sift through all this stuff and be, especially to be objective, grading hundreds of, it's usually around 90 tests that end up coming through.
Right.
Something like that.
I that's a good point that you bring up there, because I have met a couple of people who have taken it just to see.
And I get that. I understand the draw to do that, because it's fun to learn all this stuff. Like, honestly, that was the most fun. It was prepping for the test, because you're not alone. You're with a huge community of people who love learning little factoids and doing battle walks. And you really I was thinking about this on the way here. I'm just like, why am I doing this podcast? Why do I need to care
Jessie.
if other people become guides or not? But that's what happened to me when I was learning all this stuff. And when I passed the test, I left other people behind, that are going to come back and they're still trying to do this. And when I failed the test the first time, it's like, yes, it was devastating, but you're not alone. There are people who have taken this test 4 times. The majority of people and you're kicked off of this bus and you hop on the next one with them, and everybody's supportive, to come back and try this again. The majority of the people that
take the test don't get their license.
Right, because...
So you're definitely not alone if you don't make the grade.
Right. Well, as far as people that want to try again, some people, that's just, they're like, man, it's not worth it.
No, it's a lot. It's a lot. Okay, so if you're thinking of taking it just to see how wonderful you are, just Why don't we just tell you right now, you are wonderful, and give somebody else a chance. Now, on that note, though, how about, the person who people say, you should be a guide. Your personality, you know so much. You should be a guide. But I get, what am I trying to ask though? So that person comes in, how about so how would you humble that person? Because you know how sometimes, what is that, pride goeth before the fall? Is that the saying there? Somebody comes in, he's too cocky, he's too sure, and then he just falls flat on his face when the moment of truth comes. Mm-hmm. So when you have a person who believes that he's just going to be a wonderful guide, because, I don't know, whatever, people tell him he's going to be a great guide. He knows more than the average bear, which isn't much, it's not a big feat. But in other words, his perception of things is skewed, right? And maybe he doesn't live here, and he's not around all these people. What would your advice be to that person to kind of get themselves in check and get a more clear perspective as to their chances? Maybe not chances. Maybe what is it? Abilities.
I don't know. I feel like the process itself is
It'll
humbling by itself. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if you know your stuff, you're going to get through that first phase. But that being said, honestly, most people have trouble passing the written test because they haven't taken an exam like that. They haven't been in school for years.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Is like,
your brain is a muscle. Like, you have to exercise the memory, your ability to memorize things.
And they don't have practice tests that you can take, right?
Sort of. So there's like a short practice test on the
guide
website. Yeah. But my best advice, just wrapping your head around what's going to be expected.
No, wait. I'm sorry. Hold on. Before you move on to that, I don't mean to derail you here, but the practice test that's on the guide website, is it like you can answer it online and get graded on it, or is it just no? So you got to print it out, and what? Who tells you if you're right or not?
They don't. So,
okay, so it's not really a practice. It's more of a sample test, but you have no way of knowing how well you do on the sample.
But it kind of gets you geared toward, as you're reading, what kinds of things are test trivia, Okay. So, like, I'm reading about the Gettysburg campaign and everything leading up here. Well, what were the departments created in Pennsylvania, east and west for the
Susquehanna and Monongahela?
Exactly. And you start to learn, like, what is trivia and what is not. So things that aren't trivia are times and numbers. You can't prove those things.
Right.
So they're not going to be on the test. It can help you to get a point across in an essay.
Right.
You might use a number, but you're not going to be asked to validate that number in any way on that part of the test. Maybe on your oral exam, maybe. But generally not. But
you can explain that time is hard because nobody had the same time.
So as long as you read this list that's on the Becoming an LBG packet and what to expect for the test, like some of these sections are knowledge of field hospitals, their locations, and the medical practices related to the Battle of Gettysburg, knowledge of President Lincoln's Gettysburg Address and the Soldiers' National Cemetery, knowledge of other major Civil War battles. Keep in mind that everything listed there has equal weight. Every bullet there is going to have an equal section on the test. So if only one bullet is all the other battles in the Civil War, don't spend 70% of your time, cramming on all that stuff. You honestly only need a Wikipedia level knowledge of other battles in the Civil War.
Right.
So enough to put them in order, to know, generally when they happened and the northern and southern.
So someone who has a plan, a study plan, and it is, I'm going to start by reading about every battle from, Fort Sumter all the way up to Gettysburg. And then I'm going to read about Gettysburg.
Yeah, a really good resource on the level of understanding and that's even more concise is the Civil War Trust website. You can search all the battles. You can put them in order.
But I'm saying the guy who's saying that he's going to read a book about every one of these battles leading up to it is doing too much.
Well, you have time now.
Yeah,
you don't
have time
to.
now.
You don't want to cram on all that stuff. But make sure that you're giving as much weight to everything else if you're going to go into that.
Right, okay.
Because certainly the more you know, the better, but you don't want to miss a whole page on the test. So my advice to everybody looking to kind of delve into the subject matter and how much weight to give each section is just to look at that list. Look at the list of the 8 major areas, it says, of concentration on the test. This hasn't changed since 2015. And they list causes of the Civil War, consequences of the Civil War. All of those issues leading up to the start of the war as far as what to do with the states in the West and all of that. The entire Pennsylvania/Gettysburg campaign, so everything before and after the actual 3 days, and then July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd. These are each subject areas each day in those 8 areas of concentration. And then...
kind of like how we're breaking up the narrative episodes, ladies and gentlemen.
Post-battle commemoration and monuments, and the Soldiers' National Cemetery. So those are your sections for the essays. Expect to be writing essays on each one of those subject areas. So to
each
have
one?
Yeah, so to have an entire essay, you might be able to pick between 2 subjects for each section, but be expected to answer to talk about something in each one of those sections.
This is a lot of work. So someone who hasn't been in school since college or maybe high school even, this is going to be a long time since anyone has taken any test like this.
Right. Well, what you want to work on now is your long-term memory. So not memorizing any of this stuff, just creating experiences on the battlefield in museums and even with virtual tours online of things that you're going to think of when you're reading about this again. So you need more than just the words to be putting this into your brain.
Like even if you don't retain it, somewhere along the line, you're going to hear something and then your brain is going to go, oh, wait, what was that YouTube video with, Troy Harmon that I watched?
Right. And you have time to sit on the test and think about this kind of stuff. But my best advice would be to get a ticket for the museum at the visitor center, because who developed that museum? But, the Park Service. And
the Park Service,
they're designing this test, and they're trying to show you exhibits in that museum that pertain to these subject areas. So if you walk through all of the exhibits, that museum walks you through Lincoln's election and the John Brown raids before that, like all these things leading up to the Civil War. It leads you into the Gettysburg campaign and the aftermath and the development of the park. So at the very end, you're learning about the history of guiding and the development of the park and all of that. So walk through. I walked through. I took notes on the exhibits. And
do they give a discount for people studying for the guide exam up there?
No. But if you're a member of the Gettysburg Foundation.
Yes. Okay.
But, you got to think who's making this test, so they've got a whole host of things in the basement of that visitor center that they can pull from to tell whatever stories they want to tell, so if they're focused on what message they're sending out to the public changes, those exhibits are going to change, Maybe they'll focus more on, women that were at the battle or African-American citizens of Gettysburg or something like that. And, as those exhibits change, I would expect the test subject. I mean, I can't, I can't guarantee anything, but this is just, these are the things, this is the way you need to be thinking about it.
So in other words, it can be, it's a fluid thing. Like what the test is going to be this next time might not be anything like what it was last time.
No, it will probably very closely follow these subjects that were on the last 2 exams. But my best advice, because half of the test is essays, okay?
Right.
And it's very hard to write for like 4 hours straight.
Yeah.
If you type on the computer all the time, you
right.
have to
get that
write.
Writer's cramp.
You have to be able to space out your words so that the people reading this can read your handwriting.
I don't envy those people.
Those things are important, but it also, a really good thing to do would be to just pick something. You're going to have to be concise. That's what they're trying to test you for in the essays as well, is that you can get a message across, but you don't get into too much of the details. So you're going to be answering that question more like you'd be speaking to somebody on a tour.
Okay. Okay.
Like in one page, tell me what happened in the wheat field. Okay, and we know very well you can spend 8 hours in the wheat field. Okay, learning everything that happened there. But how do you boil that down to one page of information? So on the exam, I don't expect this to change, but who knows? You're given a blank piece of paper. You can't go over that page, and there's no lines or anything like that. Just the question typed in pretty small print at the top. And so take a question like, what happened in the wheat field? What happened on the 1st of July? Or just something like that. And write it out and figure out in your handwriting, how many words is that on that page? And then you can type the rest. If you come up with more ideas, just be like, I'm going to keep this to 150 words. I'm going to try to boil this idea down to this answer. And try to come up with questions for yourself on all of those 8 areas. What would be a fair question to ask somebody about these subjects? Something about the Gettysburg Address, something about, a battle action on July 1st, 2nd, or 3rd. So, the more of those you do, the better you're going to get at, at a game plan. Okay. It's going to be a lot easier getting through that.
I find that because you're right, when you're used to typing, because we don't write out longhand anymore, and whenever you try to, like my hand cramps up, like I can't do it for long. And I have actually, for a guy, I've been told I have neat handwriting, but I don't anymore. I write like a doctor. Like it's just chicken scratch. It's horrible. So I find that what helps is when I'm reading, I get a brand new notebook, and I take notes on it. I'm sure other people do this too. But I don't get that like big composition notebook because the lines are too big and I could write big. And I get like a small notebook, so I have to write small because that's harder to do. So it's better for the muscle and the hand and everything. I'm guessing. I'm no writing expert. But yeah, no, you're right. So that's a good point. So you should give yourself like practice essays and just make up questions like that. Okay.
In order to be able to get concepts across, and you can edit those over time. Like you'll probably revisit them in a year or whatever, but then you have them all. And that's what I did. Halfway through the test, you go back for a lunch break, and then you kind of look through these, just like, get some ideas in your head, and it just helps you to be prepared for.
Well, and I'm skipping ahead here, but when you do the oral, you have to have a theme to your tour. Is that what I heard, or did they always do that? Or?
Yeah, it's okay. Been no, I haven't been a guide for very long. What was your
theme?
But, well, the first theme I did morale as my theme. It was a little bit too vague, like it didn't really come through very well.
High morale or low morale?
Everything.
Oh, just morale. Okay, like an example of what made the morale go up, and then another example of what made the morale go down.
Right, or like the actions of Colonel Strong Vincent on Little Round Top. Stepping out so his men could see him, and
getting shot.
Like generals leading from the front, those kinds of things.
Right.
Concern over the ability of the Union soldiers to hold their line at the angle. As the cannons are. The shells are exploding all around them, like all the following the flag into battle. All these things have to do with that. But the second time around, I changed my theme to time, and not just timing, like the minutes it comes down to for the possession of Little Round Top, but the changes in the battlefield over time, reunion, and the monuments, and
so timing and the passage of time.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that.
Because I found that more relatable in a modern sense.
Watch the next class. Everybody's doing, I'm doing time. My theme is time.
You have to own it. Whatever your theme, and not be obsessed over it. And honestly, this isn't the time to be thinking about that kind of stuff, right. Because the last thing you want to do is start building your tour before you get through the first test. Because you're going to have
a mentor that's going to help you with
open.
That, right?
You need to be very open-minded. They're looking more for somebody that they can mold and help not somebody that's already got it figured out and is like, I'm driving here, I'm driving there. No, this is how I'm doing it.
Okay, so
don't develop a comfort zone as far as a tour. You'll have plenty of time to do that.
That was a question that I was going to ask you before. It sounds
it's only going to get in your way later if you do something like that.
No, we got it. It sounds like the way you were describing everything before is that they really don't want many people to pass. They sounds like it's all set up for failure, but no. But I want to get into it more because it's not, right? So you're saying that they actually do want to mold someone into a guide. Yeah. So in other words, when I was saying before, you spend a year on something, you usually come out with a certification of some sort, but that's not the case. That's not guaranteed here. But
this is
they
everything
kind of are
crammed into the certification, the job interview, and practical on the job training.
Right.
Like it's all squashed into one thing.
So really, as long as you're open-minded and as long as you take advice and show improvement,
that's huge.
Then, so it's the people that are stuck in their own ways and won't listen and won't improve that are going to have the harder time.
For sure.
So the guy that has been told you would make a great guide, you know so much. And he's like, I already got this in the bag. That's the guy that's going to have the problem.
They'll probably end up taking it a second time. But, that kind of person is not going to know that until they get into, if they pass the interview, into the third phase is like a practical, they want to see how well you can give interpretation on small parts of the field. And from that little sample of how you deal with those subjects, again, good thing for like an essay question is, stand a little round top, tell me what happened there. They might ask you to do that without any warning in that phase. And they'll also give you a portion, or have in the past, to prepare for. And you're going to be talking in front of the other guide candidates who have made it that far, and all of the guides and the park ranger and everything. But then, they give you feedback and they let you try again and try to see how through the weekend that you progress given their advice. Okay. But as far as one thing that nobody knows right now is what need there will be for more guides, because in the near future, because it's hard to tell what's going on right now. We're not having the normal visitation at this time. There are a lot of guides who are over 60 who do not want to put themselves unnecessarily at risk, who are doing some tours, who aren't handing in their badges or anything, but they're waiting it out to see what happens in the winter. Maybe they'll guide next spring. Hard to tell. We don't know what visitation to the park is going to look like in the future. And you kind of have to balance that with the number of guides that are still on, the number of guides that will be retiring soon. Because once you reach a certain age, you don't have minimums to meet anymore, as long as you've been guiding for a certain number of years.
Okay. So it's number of years, not number of tours.
If you're 80 years old and you take the tour, you still have minimums for a certain number of years before you can become emeritus, they call it.
If you're 80 years old and you take the test.
Yeah,
is what you're saying. Okay, but
who
knows?
Once you pass the written exam, that's when they decide how many people they can accept becoming a guide. So if they take 28 people and they pass them through to the interview phase, they fully expect that 28 people could become licensed battlefield guides.
Okay.
So
gotcha.
After that first cut, everybody's on the same page. Doesn't matter if you're first on the exam, everybody's on the same page after the written test.
So then it's like you're in a class.
If you're the last in the cut, you start all over again each phase.
Okay.
You're not going to be in a hierarchy throughout the rest of it at all.
Right. Okay. All right. So that's good, because I know that I've heard from people and they all seem like it's the deck is stacked against them and they have to be like some kind of a Superman to be able to pass it, and I never heard that from anyone who's taken the test, pass or fail. But it seems that's the perception out there among people. Like a lot of people are just, they won't even try because it's like, nah, there's no way you can get it. Well, obviously you can get it because some people get it, But so that's good. I just wanted to clarify that because I know there's that perception out there. Mm.
I mean, and that's the only. I'm only going from what I've experienced. Obviously, I was able to make it through. Right. But. You have to think from the perspective of the people designing the test. If I was going to make a test question, they're not trying to take you out at the knees. It's like, especially after you get off after that first phase when you actually get to talk to the people who are examining you. they want you to do well.
What kind of questions did they ask you when you got to the interview?
Well,
are you not allowed to share that?
I don't want to, just because
okay.
that's the reason the test had to be redone. Like, I don't want to do anything that would jeopardize, the way the test is given in the future.
Sorry, that was unfair.
They were dealing with, some things about, people who fought here and, controversies dealing with the battle, also with current events.
During the interview?
Yeah, during the interview.
So they're not interviewing you about you, per se.
I mean, when you think about, one of the questions I'm asked on tours all the time now is, what's happening with the Confederate monuments? How are you what are you going to say to that?
Right.
And I have to have an answer to that. So things that are coming up because of the current culture on the park would be fair questions to ask somebody.
Sure.
How are you going to deal with this if somebody asks you about this?
Yeah. And that's where you come out and you go, well, that's just Yankee lies, and the South will rise again, and the war wasn't about slavery, right? That's where you see that. And that gets you through to the next line. All right, so you want to get to some of the questions? Or
Yeah, that's
okay,
fine.
let's do that. All right, do you have any more there?
No.
Okay.
I mean, that's really it.
Okay, so we're going to move on to some questions here from our listeners. Serge. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to be able to send questions in and you're wondering how these people know ahead of time what we're going to talk about, well, they're patrons over at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg. Okay, so Serge sent a letter in, basically a love letter addressed to you. He says, "Hi, Jessie. Love hearing you on the podcast. Here's my slightly rambling thoughts that eventually led to my question. It has always seemed to me that being charming, dynamic, and patient like Matt would be as important, if not more than important." would be as important, if not more important, than almost anything else when it comes to how visitors perceive and remember their guided tour. There is an essence, a magic quality, if you will, that separates the very best LBGs from the rest, right? You want to start with that? Is right? Is he right?
Yeah. So that's the reason why there are different phases to the test, and especially when you get to that last phase, and this differs from the past, but they're really looking for that eye contact and the persona that's going to make an emotional impression on someone.
Engage the people.
That is ultimately the goal, is to get somebody to understand the context of what happened at this battle and relate it to what's happening in the world today, maybe, but most of all, like, to themselves. If they've got somebody that fought here, that's one thing, but it's really the human aspect that appeals to people. You don't have to tell stories of individuals all over the field. You can just make sure you leave space for an important moment, that somebody's going to remember. But factual accuracy is important because we want people to come back to the battlefield. And most people do if they've had that first experience that's really grabbed their attention. Mm-hmm. When they were 10 years old, they remember somebody doing something on one of the tours, but that's it. They remember Bob reading a letter that a soldier wrote as he was dying. Okay, mm-hmm. and that made an impression on them.
Oh yeah.
But if you go home and you found out that something the guide told you wasn't true, then why would you hire another expert the next time?
Right.
We wanted people to take guides again.
Yeah.
We want to continue to have a job in the future as well, but all of that's important.
Okay.
But especially toward the end, you can leave a lot of space in your tour. It's the hardest thing to do because you don't want to cut things. You're just like, man, I got to talk about the wheat field. You don't have to. You want them to come back. There's not enough time to tell somebody about all the events of the battle. And if you're being tested, if you leave a hole and someone's like, well, wait, what about this? They'll ask you.
Sure.
They'll give you that opportunity to fill that in.
Yeah.
They don't want to just watch you drown. Okay. They know you're nervous. You're just like, oh, I'm in. What about this part of the fight? And you're just like, okay, well, over here. You can go into it. Just have a quick answer to it. But the more space you leave open, the more people will be interested in your tour in the real world because they feel like they can contribute,
mm-hmm.
that they're coming up with these ideas. What about this? Well, I was hoping you'd ask. That's kind of the tour you try to set up to get a little more interactive with people.
So the next thing though, like, so Serge is basically saying what we've already covered in that personality and an ability to
and it can
engage.
make up for a host of other errors.
Yeah,
as well.
right.
If you're 2 minutes over on your tour and somebody didn't like you, if you were condescending or something like that, they're more likely to say, you really should have been back on time. I'm going to make you do this again.
Right.
Whereas if you're very inviting and you give a just awesome tour and you're 10 minutes late, they might just let you go and pass you that time.
Especially if you throw in some pratfalls. I noticed that people find those funny.
For sure.
But Serge wants to know, he has more of a personal bend to this, and he says, in your own experience, how much time did you spend considering or tweaking your own personality and presentation before you set on your oral exam? So we said before, you have a mentor, they help you, they work with you and everything, but did you have to do any kind of soul searching or like personality attitude adjustments or anything like that with yourself?
Yeah. So the first time I failed the oral exam. So it's basically telling you, that your personality and your toy, is not good enough. And you have to think, well, man, what? I need to change something. And so I didn't leave enough space in my tour. I was just trying to blurt it all out there. And the second time around, I had a mentor who totally took it at a different angle. He had passed in the new wave of examination. Okay. And I just remembered that the examiners were really impressed with his tour.
So he passed when you failed is what you're saying? Okay.
And I was just like, just let me take your tour. Like, what is this? And man, there was one point when we were at the angle, he like left this silent moment and I was like, please start talking or I'm going to cry. I've taken 700 tours. I worked at the Segway company for quite a few years before doing this.
Experienced
and
tours.
I'm like, man, I have never felt like crying on a tour. And I mean, the goal is not to make everybody cry, but
yes, it is.
But the advice that he gave me was to go online and watch videos about effective storytelling. Like, why are certain comedians successful? It's because they plant a seed that you don't know they're planting, and they come back to it.
Right.
And the first time I took the test, I knew some of that, but I was planting seeds everywhere, and I didn't know what I planted or where I did by the time it was over,
Right.
And so the visitors having that same experience, they're confused. There's too much going on. You're trying to make too many connections.
Right.
You just have to boil it down to some really good ones.
Oh, wait,
and
why
be
did
like,
she mention
all right,
Fredericksburg?
and now remember back when you saw this? Okay, and why do you remember this? It's because this veteran was reaching through time to put this man's face on this statue so you would remember that he was here, So those kind of moments on the tour where you're planting a seed way back that they can remember and coming back to it, those things are going to make an impression on the people that you're...
I would imagine that you also, it would definitely help if you are good at reading other people. So, gauging, if you got kids in the family, does this kid respond to actually seeing something and being able to touch it and like hear a story to it? Or is he just more interested in blood and guts? And, is the mom going to get touched by a story of a dying son writing to his mother?
Never make assumptions.
No, you got to kind of get to know them, right?
Just because, our current guide supervisor is a woman, don't start telling her stories about women all over the battlefield. It's like she doesn't want to hear that. Unless she asks about it, you don't want to pander to people that haven't been, they didn't ask for it.
They'll let you know.
And I've been surprised on tours. Sometimes the quietest people on the tour are the people that the tour is really for. They just don't interact that way. And you might not know anything about them. I had these really two quiet girls on one of my tours. I found out halfway through that they were both combat medics. I'm like, oh, geez. I'm sorry I didn't ask earlier. And then I kind of shifted the tour that direction.
So it helps to ask that at the beginning of the tour then.
Right. It helps to get to know your visitors. But when you're taking the test, there are different... You know who your options are for pretty much for the guides that will be sitting in. And it's always a wild card. You never know who that guide's going to be.
Right.
But you'll find that each of them have a different way of, being the first-time visitor on your tour. and
So they're
playing
acting.
that part. Yeah, they're not going to try to stump you. They're trying to give you the opportunity to give a tour to first-time visitors.
So does it help when you're doing the oral part of the exam to say, so where are you from? What do you do? That type of stuff? Yeah, because they're going to have a story and they're going to do characters.
Well, that was one of my first tests. We're going out the door, and I was like, have you seen any movies or the Gettysburg movie or the movie at the Visitor Center? And do you have any favorite generals or, anybody that fought here? And he said, Buster Kilrain. And I was just like, why'd you do that to me before you even left the building? And you have to be sensitive so that would be a fair interview question. What do you do if you've got someone and they say they're related to Buster Kilrain? How do you approach that? A good way to answer that, just for example, would be to think of people that were like that in the battle. He, as a person, did not exist at this battle, but there were people that, were close to officers that fought on the battlefield that are always there for them and, maybe patched up their wounds at the hospital. Stories that you can find like that and have
I think the Confederate Army had a good deal of those people, didn't they? That were close to the officers and always, they brought them with them.
It's not funny. I just laugh when Matt's being awkward, which is all the time.
No, what I like is like when we're not doing a recording, like you actually laugh at some of these things, but then you just barrel through. And then I just
talk over them.
Okay, let's go to another one here. Let's go to another one here.
I don't know if that's a fair tactic to use on a tour.
No, you should be real.
Maybe it is.
Oh, on a tour?
All right.
Just barreling through.
Grandpa keeps telling the kids wrong facts, so you just keep barreling along.
Yeah, or dad jokes.
Yeah.
Okay, Paula Belton wrote in, and she has a couple of questions for you. Park history, how much studying should be on park history? What are valuable resources to learn from? And advice to learn more about the park. So she wants to learn more about park history. What are some good books about that? Are there any out there?
Yes. I thought you might even have it back there. What's the red one? That you had 2 copies and you lent one to me.
Jim Week's book. It's my
on the
favorite.
Development of
it's Gettysburg and Memory, Marketplace, and Miracles, or something like that. You see it there.
And Miracles.
You see it there, Eric? It's I think it's that's it. Let me see that right there. It's Gettysburg, Memory, Market, and an American Shrine by Jim Weeks. It's
There's
fantastic.
some good things in there, especially because there have been some arguments on the internet about the feeling of the veterans toward Confederate monuments when they were first introduced.
Right. And
you've got people on both sides of the issue, even amongst Union veterans, just like we have today. And one of the arguments that John Batchelder was making was that if we put Confederate monuments on the battlefield, it gives more weight to the Union story. And that's where a lot of the Union support of Confederate markers first, before there were sculptures, came from, is the veterans saying, well, how am I supposed to stand on Cemetery Ridge and get my family to understand, what came at me across that field when there's nothing over there that looks intimidating at all.
Right.
Then you see Robert E. Lee and the soldiers up close when you're over there on Confederate lines, and they're not. Doesn't look like somebody you want to mess with. Mm-hmm. And then you're over here and you're trying to imagine 13,000 of them, coming at you. And it gives you something to, just like we're talking about memorizing things for the test, it gives you something. A sculpture puts emotion into the story.
Yeah. I was on the Rogue Historian podcast. I think it was over a year ago now, and we were just talking about our podcast. But we got to talking about something, and he had asked what I thought about the whole monument and Confederate flag thing and all that stuff, and I said I don't want to get into this stuff. I'm nobody. No, my opinion on this does not matter at all. So I'm not going to give it, and I'm not going to tell you what I think. Except to say, what good was Batman without the Joker? Like, you have to have the bad guy in order for the good guy to be good. And in order for you to see what the good guy had to overcome and what he defeated, you can't act like he was just fighting the air. Like, and I think to have some kind of markers, maybe not things glorifying enemies of our country, but some kind of marker for a learning purpose is almost necessary.
But the learning doesn't stop there. You know, the southern states wanted to glorify things about, what they did during the war. But why did those monuments show up? That whole story, that has to do with Reconstruction. So it is very important to put equal weight into studying Reconstruction, because that is the most relevant thing in our time today, is the failure of the Northern government to fully deal with the result of the Civil War.
Yeah, it's actually probably has more ramifications on modern life than the war itself does.
Exactly. And those are the things that you have to deal with when people are, read the news and come to the battlefield. Those are the reasons why these monuments are here in some cases. And it's too much to talk about in one podcast.
Yeah, I got you. But yeah, okay. So start with that book. There's not a lot of books, though, about the history of the park, right?
Every year when the Guide Association offers the prep classes, there's always been a class devoted to that subject. So, and some of it you're not going to know until right before the test, because they might ask you, like, who's in charge of this and that, who are your superiors in the Park Service, and that changes on a regular basis. So you kind of want to know, but they go over that in the classes as well. So they usually offer a class on the history of guiding and a separate class on the history of the Park Service and on the development of the battlefield and that kind of stuff. So stay tuned for that kind of stuff.
Matt McClanahan says, thank you for putting this together. Just listened to the Cupola interview tonight. Loved it. Also, just for the record, I am not Rue's grandson. Questions. Number 1, I live out of state, but would love the opportunity to sit for the guide exam. Is it possible for an out-of-state person to take the guide exam? I would like to come up and spend a few weeks giving tours and enjoying Gettysburg in the summer. Any insights or suggestions?
Well, last time they offered the test, they only opened it up to people who were going to be able to fulfill a full-time license requirement, which is 175 tours a year.
So that would be tough.
It's tough, but it's not impossible.
Well, if you're in Tennessee, that's tough.
Well, if you come up here for, a couple months out of the year, you can accomplish that.
Right.
There are many different companies that you can schedule yourself with. You can make yourself available until sunset,
Yeah.
So you can really use the day and get 3 tours a day in a busy time of year on a pretty regular basis. But for people that are out of state trying to prep for the test in the first place, one really useful tool is Google Earth. Like, you can kind of drive yourself around the battlefield even when you're not here, because you have to be really familiar with the field in order to get past. There's questions that are photographs that ask about farms and the relationship of ridges and hills and the terrain, as well as random monuments that might list something important that happened. Like, if a colonel was killed on the spot where someone placed this monument, you should know that. Those are fair questions. And most of the touring questions deal with things that are off of the normal route, like not out on Jones Avenue by the high school or something.
Right. So so maybe it would actually behoove him, in order
try
to
get here as much as you can.
Yeah. Like, come out as much as you can before you take the test, because you won't get to do those tours every summer.
So you kind of have to stay tuned for that, and what you'd have to commit to in order to, because I know some friends that really wanted to take the test but could not commit to that full-time requirement last time. And there are certain days in the part-time license that you have to be here as well. So it's possible. There are people that live part of the year in California and come over here and get their minimums. So, and it's also, that last time it was full-time, but they only had to commit to that for the first year, and then they could choose whatever.
Right.
The year
so
after
like the
that.
other way around, when it's part-time, it doesn't mean you can't go to full-time, and then when it's full-time the first time, it's just what they need that year, basically, is what they're saying, or for the short term. Okay, Jamie Clifton says, I have wanted to try my hand at becoming a guide, but I hear that it's very political and outsiders rarely get their licenses even. Is there any truth to this?
No.
No, I don't. It's not political, though?
Well,
not like national politics.
First off, I mean, the written test is blind, so they don't know who you are taking the written test. And once you make it through that first phase, it really is a supportive network of people.
Okay.
Like, I've been very close to both sides of it, and I can tell you there's no vendetta against somebody. They want to see you. They want to see you succeed.
Right.
And if you want to succeed, that's really all you need. You might not get through this time, but you'll get through the next time. Like, I was encouraged to come back after everything that happened. Because I asked him straight out, I'm just like, I don't want to be that person. It's like the stray cat at the door that just keeps coming back. You need to tell me if this is not for me.
Right.
I'll stop. And they're just like, no. Like, we think you can do this. You just need to work on these things. And
so you did, and you came back, and you got it.
Yep.
You won.
I did.
You won. All right. Julie Morgan says, I have been reading the books listed on the Guide Association website to prepare for the test, but I hear that some of the books are marred with errors. Is there any reason they are still on the list? Also, how do you recommend someone learn to detect the bias of an author? That's a good question.
I mean, there's one book that's going to get you through most of it. Well, 2 books. 10 books. Okay. Is Coddington, Edwin Coddington's book on the Gettysburg campaign. It's because he's very level-headed. One thing that you want to look for is notes. So if there's no source notes, if you can't tell where somebody got the information, then you're just at their mercy. You have no idea where. With any
author you're talking about,
right.
You're talking about bias, yeah.
And so footnotes are a huge thing to look for.
And Coddington's got a lot of footnotes.
Yeah, and then another book that's helpful because there are questions on the arrangement of regiments or brigades in the action, usually at pretty key points, like who's on Little Round Top, Culp's Hill, places that are critical moments in the battle. Phil Lano's book on
the map.
It's very intimidating if you've never. It's not the first book you want to read because it is a lot of minutia. But he also has footnotes that explain the story, so you can read that book end to end, and it'll still give you a good story of the Battle of Gettysburg.
But it's a map book.
It is a map
book, yeah.
And it's just so that you can look up any phase in the action and know exactly where people were the best of.
How about Godfrey's Maps of Gettysburg? Any good?
I'd say that would be a good one before
Lano's
book.
Really? That's interesting. Okay.
I don't know. I haven't really spent much time with that one. There's also another one that's pretty basic that I had it's like, I don't know the author's names, but it's the one that's green.
Yes, okay. With the glossy cover.
So that's good for like brigade level, and then if you want to get more detailed than that, then
I also kind of Bob has it, and I was thumbing through it, and I thought, well, this is good for kids,
but
or
he's
like
got
young
no
adults.
Footnote. He's
right.
Yeah,
it's just.
I don't know if he has no footnotes, but not enough.
But it's mostly math. But I mean, it's very colorful. It's done in like very modern graphics. I think for young people, it would draw them in because it's what they're used to seeing. Whereas the Lano and Godfried books are very flat. You know what I mean? But we know what I mean by that, by flat. Yeah. So I think those would be the ones. All right.
Yeah, but there's places where bias won't hurt you that much. Like Bruce Catton's books. He puts a lot of his opinions in there, but he's giving such a good overview of what happened that it's invaluable. So you kind of, I don't know.
I hear from a lot of people.
The more you read, the better.
Sure.
That's how you kind of learn to separate people's.
A lot of people bring up, I just read The Stars in Their Courses, Shelby Foote. And everybody loves Shelby Foote as a person. He's like that folksy old grandpa smoking a corncob pipe on the porch telling you a story. Everybody loves him. But as a historian, though, I remember I had Joseph Harsh as a professor for the Civil War class I took at George Mason. And I remember I bummed a cigarette off of him. after class, and we're sitting out there. You know who I'm talking about? He wrote a book on Antietam that was like the Antietam Bible for a while. Okay, well, sorry. But anyway, so I was all, pretty new to everything, and I said, so what do you think about Shelby Foote? And he goes, well, he's a good novelist. And that was where he left it. And so then after that, I said, well, okay, then I'm going to take Shelby Foote with a grain of salt. And even though where he's right and everything like that. But a lot of people call in, they write in and they talk about Shelby Foote. What are your thoughts on the Stars in Their Courses, his Gettysburg chapter?
I'd say there's lessons to be learned from all of it. Like, why does everybody love Shelby Foote? He is a good storyteller. Like, you're going to need storytelling skills at some point. But
so
he never
Shelby
intended
Foote.
it to be a researched,
it's a narrative. It says it.
Right. And I believe that's what he's said himself in interviews about doing the project. But all of that is important because it grabs you to start reading denser stuff, if you really want to figure out what happened or where those stories come from. Because one of the problems with storytelling is the soldiers like to tell stories too, and they're going to get more into storytelling 20 years after the battle. Okay. So a lot of those good stories that, they could be true. It's not to say that they aren't, but historically, from a historian's perspective, you don't want to take just one story and run with it. You want to have as close to a fact as you can. So multiple accounts intersecting. Right. It's like I always say, I come from a maritime background, though brief. That's what I went to school for. And it's just like plotting your position on a chart. The stars in their courses. Look at this.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful. Okay. You're welcome.
So you might only have one piece of information. It's just a line on the chart. You could be anywhere on that line. You're on one of those spots on the line, that's for sure. Okay. But if you've got two perspectives, the further they are apart in their origin, so let's say you have a Union account and a Confederate account of some event happening, it crosses in such a way that you can say, yeah, we're probably right there.
Right.
But if you got a lot of stories from a similar perspective, it might cross, but it's not as good. It's better than nothing. And then, of course, some things, you've got so many perspectives, you definitely know, there's no way this can be wrong. But there are certain instances when you're talking about, like, say, the Wheatfield fight, where you have 5 accounts and they're all different. And you're going, all I know is that at least 4 people are wrong, and maybe all 5 are wrong. And a lot of this has to do with just the nature of human memory. Mm-hmm. And I find that very interesting. And it applies to us as guides. So if the last time you read Coddington was 20 years ago, well, maybe there are things that have changed in your mind from telling the story and telling it a little bit different each time, every time you go out there. And
do you recommend someone come and, obviously, because this is more money for the guides, but come and take tours with guides often to get a sense of how to give a tour and what you might need to know?
I would say don't obsess over it, but yeah, you at least want to take a tour or two, because a lot of guides, have been through other processes. They're trying to gear people toward. It kind of outlines it in the last guide exam announcement. More of that, visitor interaction. Not to say that most guides have taken a more rigid test, but have developed those skills just naturally from dealing with the public over the years. Yeah. So everybody gives the tour a different way than they did when they took the test, no matter when you you took the test. So I wouldn't obsess over it, because when you get through the exam, you'll get a mentor who will tell you exactly what you need to be thinking about. So. But it's definitely interesting to see the level of detail, because it's not really overwhelming, especially if you know a little bit about what happened here. 2 hours goes by pretty fast. Mm-hmm.
Yes, it does. And we just did this for 4 hours. We just did a 4-hour show, and it went by and it felt like an hour and a half. Yeah. So anything else you want to add before I close? It wasn't 4 hours. It'd be dark by now if it was 4 hours. Anything you want to add?
I would just encourage anybody who's thinking about the test to, when you feel comfortable, start coming out here and taking these walks and, doing little tours and trying to build up a network of people to support you, because I think that's invaluable.
Well, that's a few people have written in and saying, but you need it. And a few people have written in saying that they're studying for it. And so we're talking about all getting together and going out and studying on the field and seeing what we all know.
Right. It's creating experiences that will put this stuff a little deeper down.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is you can read all the live long day, but until you actually go out and create a memory of something, you got to do that. You got to get out here.
And, we're still doing tours right now. It's different, but not crazy. We don't have a lot of volume on the battlefield right now, but the visitor center has been closed just on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Mm-hmm. Guides are still operating out of the visitor center. You just have to call in advance.
Ironically, being here at Gettysburg, by the way, we're recording this from Gettysburg today, but being here at Gettysburg, we become the de facto visitor center, and the parking lot seems to be busier on Tuesdays and Wednesdays than any of the other days.
Everybody's looking for a place to pee, and no one can find it.
No one can find it. All right. Well, so go ahead. Yeah, you were...
So there are all different kinds of private tour companies. Aside from the Gettysburg Foundation, the Heritage Center is the only place that's offering walk-in tours right now. So you can call ahead to see if there's anybody waiting there, or you can just walk in, especially on a weekend, if you haven't planned ahead, because not many people are doing that right now. They don't
planning
know,
ahead.
What the virus is doing, what the rules are months ahead of time.
Right.
So it is possible to wing it, but if you go to Gettysburg tourguides.org is like the catch-all for all that stuff. If you call the office number, they'll set you up for the type of tour that you're interested in. I talk with my right hand. I need to put it in my left.
Yeah, what's the number for the guide office?
Oh, I should have it memorized.
Oh, Jessie. Well, you can call the guide office and you can find out how to. You can book a guide.
They just called me. So
you can book a guide through there. You could book a guide through the Heritage Center.
I just have to make sure I don't call them.
But most of all, ladies and gentlemen, you should just contact me, Matt, at addressinggettysburg.com, and I will put you in touch with Jessie or any of the guides that you hear here on the show. But go ahead, give their number too.
717-337-1709. We will get back to you. It's very old school at the guide office. There's literally a card index that we go through to call people back, so we don't have to hire staff and charge extra. Right? So if you have a certain specific interest, or you just want to do a tour on the first day, we can arrange all of those things and set you up with somebody.
Okay. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have for today. Don't forget to like, share, and leave a 5-star review. And if you like what we do and want more in-depth interviews with historians, rangers, guides, and just interesting people, and if you want more content from Addressing Gettysburg, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Addressing Gettysburg. Take care of yourself, Jessie. Thank you very much for coming on. This was very fun. And don't forget, Matt at addressinggettysburg.com if you'd like to take a tour with Jessie or any of the guides that you hear on the show. And thank you all, and God bless.